The spotlight hit my face like a slap, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. There I was, standing backstage at the charity gala I'd spent 6 months organizing, watching my entire world shift beneath my feet. The man I thought I knew, the man I was supposed to marry in 3 weeks, was accepting an award on stage as one of Portland's most influential philanthropists. My modest freelance consultant fiancé was actually Alex Harrison of the Harrison real estate empire, and he'd just donated $2 million to the cause I'd been fighting for my entire career. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. The most shocking part was hearing my sister Victoria's voice from the audience, loud enough for everyone to hear, declaring that I didn't deserve any of this, that I'd never deserved love, and that she'd make sure everyone knew exactly who I really was. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 days earlier, I'd been sitting in my cramped apartment in Southeast Portland, surrounded by event planning binders and a growing sense of dread. The Portland Community Foundation's annual gala was my biggest project yet, the kind of event that could make or break my career as an event coordinator. I'd been working at the community center for 3 years, organizing everything from neighborhood block parties to small fundraisers, but this gala represented everything I'd been working toward. It was my chance to prove that I could handle something bigger, something that mattered. My laptop screen glowed in the dim light of my living room, showing the final guest list, catering confirmations, and vendor contracts. Everything was falling into place perfectly, except for one nagging detail that had been eating at me for weeks. Victoria had been unusually interested in the event, asking pointed questions about the guest list, the venue, even the specific timing of the awards ceremony. My sister never showed interest in my work unless she could find some way to benefit from it, or more likely, undermine it. The sound of my phone buzzing against the coffee table pulled me from my thoughts. Alex's name lit up the screen, and despite everything weighing on my mind, I felt that familiar flutter of happiness that came with seeing his messages. Even after 2 years together, he still had that effect on me. "Hey beautiful," his text read. "How's the gala prep going? Need me to bring dinner?" I smiled, typing back quickly, drowning in spreadsheets but making progress. Chinese food would be amazing. Within 30 minutes, Alex was at my door with takeout from our favorite spot, and that easy smile that had first caught my attention at a small charity event I'd organized 2 years ago. He'd been volunteering that day, helping set up chairs and tables, and when he'd introduced himself as a freelance consultant, I'd been impressed by how down-to-earth he seemed. Most of the wealthy donors at these events treated the volunteers like invisible furniture, but Alex had spent the entire afternoon joking with the setup crew and genuinely listening when I'd talked about the impact we were trying to make. "You're stress cleaning again," he observed, noticing how I'd arranged all my planning materials in perfectly straight lines across the coffee table. I laughed, realizing he was right. Victoria stopped by earlier, I admitted, and I saw his expression shift slightly. Alex had never said anything directly negative about my sister, but I'd noticed how his jaw tightened whenever her name came up in conversation. "What did she want?" he asked, settling onto my couch and pulling me against his side. "She was asking about the gala again. Specifically about the mystery donor who's funding the new youth center." I paused, feeling that familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. She seemed really interested in who it might be. Alex was quiet for a moment, his fingers absently stroking my hair. "And you think she's up to something?" "I know she's up to something," I said with a bitter laugh. "Victoria doesn't ask questions unless she's planning to use the information somehow. She's been weird about this whole event from the beginning." What I didn't tell Alex was the conversation I'd overheard 3 weeks earlier when Victoria had been on the phone in our parents' kitchen. I'd stopped by to drop off some documents my mother had requested, and I'd heard Victoria talking to someone about making sure Mia knows her place, and something about the perfect opportunity to show everyone who really deserves recognition. At the time, I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid, but Victoria's sudden interest in my work felt too calculated to ignore. Maybe she's just proud of what you've accomplished, Alex suggested, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it any more than I did. I turned to look at him, taking in his familiar features. His dark hair was slightly messed up from the Portland drizzle, and he had that tired look he got when he'd been working long hours on whatever consulting project was keeping him busy lately. He'd been vague about his current work, mentioning something about real estate development and urban planning, but I'd learned not to push for details. Freelance work could be unpredictable, and I respected that he might not always be able to discuss client confidentiality issues. Victoria has never been proud of anything I've done, I said softly. When I got the job at the community center, she told our parents it was a waste of my education. When I got promoted to lead coordinator, she said it was probably because they felt sorry for me. She's never once acknowledged that I might actually be good at what I do. Alex's arm tightened around me. You know that's not true, right? You're incredible at what you do. I've watched you organize events, Mia. You have this gift for seeing all the moving pieces and making them work together, the way you connect with people, the way you make everyone feel valued and heard. It's remarkable. His words meant everything to me, especially coming from someone who'd seen me at my most stressed and overwhelmed. Alex had been my anchor through every challenge of the past 2 years, supporting my dreams even when my own family dismissed them. He'd helped me set up for countless events, never complaining about the early mornings or late nights, and he'd celebrated every small victory like it was a major triumph. I just want this gala to go perfectly, I admitted. It's not just about my career. The money we raise will fund programs that actually change kids' lives. These aren't wealthy donors looking for tax write-offs. These are people who believe in making their community better. And it will go perfectly, Alex said with quiet confidence, because you've thought of everything, and because you care more about the mission than the recognition. That was one of the things I loved most about Alex. He understood that my work wasn't about climbing some corporate ladder or impressing people with fancy titles. It was about creating opportunities for kids who didn't have them, about building spaces where families could come together, about proving that small actions could have big impacts. He'd grown up middle class in a Portland suburb, and he understood the value of community investment in a way that my family never had. The next morning, I was at Blue Star Coffee reviewing final vendor confirmations when Victoria appeared at my table. She was dressed in one of her signature power suits, the kind that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and her perfectly styled blonde hair caught the morning light streaming through the coffee shop windows. Mia, darling, she said, sliding into the chair across from me without invitation. I wanted to chat about tomorrow.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Night, I looked up from my checklist, immediately on guard. Victoria never called me darling, unless she wanted something or was about to deliver bad news. What about tomorrow night? I asked carefully. Well, I've been thinking, she began, stirring sugar into her latte with deliberate precision. This gala is such a big opportunity for our family. Mother and father will be there, and so many influential people from their social circle. I just want to make sure everything reflects well on the Thompson name. There it was, the familiar reminder that nothing I did was really about me. It was about how it reflected on the family reputation. Victoria had perfected this particular brand of manipulation over the years, making her criticism sound like concern while simultaneously undermining my confidence. The event is about raising money for youth programs, I replied evenly. I'm pretty sure the Thompson family reputation will survive an evening of charitable giving. Victoria's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in her eyes. Of course, sweetie. I just think it might be wise to have someone with more experience handling the high-profile aspects of the evening, the donor recognition, the speeches, that sort of thing. You know how important first impressions are. My stomach dropped. Victoria, what are you talking about? I've been planning this event for 6 months. Every detail has been approved by the foundation board. Everything is handled. I know you've worked very hard, she said in that patronizing tone she'd perfected since childhood. But let's be realistic. This is a $2 million fundraiser with some of the city's most important philanthropists attending. Maybe it would be better if someone with actual experience in high-stakes events took the lead on the presentation aspects. The coffee in my mouth suddenly tasted bitter. Someone like you, I suppose. I do have extensive experience with corporate events and donor relations, Victoria said smoothly, and I've already spoken with mother and father about it. They think it makes perfect sense for me to handle the more visible aspects of the evening, while you manage the behind-the-scenes coordination. My hands clenched around my coffee cup. This was exactly what Victoria always did. She'd wait until I was completely invested in something, until I'd poured my heart and soul into making it perfect, and then she'd swoop in to claim credit for the most important parts. She'd done it with my high school valedictorian speech, taking over the presentation because she was more comfortable with public speaking. She'd done it with my college internship, convincing our father to call his connections and get her a better position at the same company. And now she was trying to do it with the most important professional moment of my life. No, I said quietly. Victoria blinked, clearly not expecting resistance. I'm sorry. I said no. My voice was steadier than I felt. This is my event, Victoria. I've spent months building relationships with these donors, coordinating with the vendors, planning every aspect of the evening. You don't get to walk in at the last minute and take over because you think I'm not capable of handling it. For just a moment, Victoria's composed facade slipped, and I saw something ugly flash across her face. Mia, honey, I think you're being a little emotional about this. No one is questioning your capabilities. We just want to make sure nothing goes wrong. Nothing will go wrong, I said firmly, because I know what I'm doing. Victoria leaned back in her chair, studying me with a calculating expression I'd seen countless times before. It was the look she got when she was deciding how much force to use to get what she wanted. I really hope you're right, she said finally, her voice carrying an undertone that made my skin crawl. Because if something does go wrong, if this event doesn't meet expectations, it won't just reflect poorly on you, it will reflect poorly on all of us. And that would be such a shame, especially with your engagement announcement coming up. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Victoria was reminding me that my relationship with Alex, my happiness, my future could all become casualties if I didn't fall in line. She'd done this before, using my relationships and achievements as leverage to maintain her position as the family favorite. My engagement has nothing to do with this event, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I felt a chill of uncertainty. Victoria's smile returned, bright and predatory. Of course not, sweetheart. I'm just saying that everyone will be watching tomorrow night. Everyone will be forming opinions about who you are, what you're capable of, whether you're really ready for the kind of life you're trying to build with Alex. She stood up, smoothing her skirt with practiced elegance. I've already had my assistant coordinate with the venue about some small adjustments to the program. Nothing major, just some refinements to ensure everything runs smoothly. I'm sure you understand. And then she was gone, leaving me sitting alone with the crushing realization that she'd already made moves behind my back. Whatever Victoria had planned, it was already in motion, and I was about to find out just how far she was willing to go to prove that I didn't deserve the life I was trying to build. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called Alex. He answered on the second ring, and just hearing his voice made some of the tension in my chest ease. "Hey, how did the coffee meeting go?" he asked. "Victoria is planning something," I said without preamble. She's trying to take over parts of the gala, and she's already made changes behind my back." There was a pause, and when Alex spoke again, his voice had a quality I'd never heard before. It was still warm, still supportive, but underneath there was something harder, more decisive. "Mia," he said carefully, "I need you to trust me about something. Can you do that?" "Of course," I replied automatically, though something in his tone made my heart rate pick up. Whatever Victoria is planning, whatever she thinks she's going to accomplish tomorrow night, it's not going to work out the way she expects. You've put everything into this event, and you deserve to see it succeed. Just focus on that, okay? Focus on why you're doing this and let me handle the rest." There was something in his voice that I couldn't quite identify, a confidence that seemed to go beyond his usual supportive encouragement. It was the voice of someone who was used to handling problems, someone who had resources and connections I didn't know about. "Alex, what do you mean? How can you handle it?" "I just can," he said, and for the first time in our relationship, I heard something that sounded almost like authority in his voice. "Trust me, Mia, by tomorrow night, everyone will know exactly what you're capable of, and Victoria will never be able to take anything away from you again." After I hung up, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, staring at my planning binders and trying to make sense of the conversation. Alex had sounded so certain, so confident about his ability to protect me from whatever Victoria was planning. But how could a freelance consultant, someone who lived as modestly as I did, have any real power against my sister's connections and manipulations? I spent the rest of the day making final preparations for the gala, trying to push away the growing sense that everything was about to change in ways I couldn't predict. Victoria had made her move, Alex had promised to handle it, and tomorrow night would determine whether my dreams survived the collision between them. What I didn't know was that the collision had already begun, and the person I thought I knew best was about to reveal that everything I believed about my life was built on carefully constructed lies designed to protect me from a truth I wasn't ready to handle. Tomorrow night wasn't just about raising money for youth programs, it was about discovering who I really was, who Alex really was, and whether love could survive the weight of secrets that had been hidden for the sake of something greater than both of us. The morning of the gala arrived with the kind of crisp October weather that made Portland feel like a postcard. I woke up in Alex's arms, sunlight streaming through the windows of his modest apartment in the Hawthorne district. For a moment, everything felt perfectly normal. He was still the same man who made terrible coffee but somehow always knew exactly what to say when I was overwhelmed. He was still the person who remembered that I liked extra foam in my lattes, and who never made me feel guilty for caring more about community impact than salary figures. But as I lay there watching him sleep, I couldn't shake the memory of yesterday's phone call. There had been something different in his voice, a certainty that went beyond mere emotional support. It was the kind of confidence that came from having actual power, actual resources, and I couldn't figure out where that would come from in the life I thought we shared. Alex stirred beside me, and when he opened his eyes, his first instinct was to pull me closer. "Good morning, event coordinator extraordinaire," he murmured against my hair. "Ready to change some lives today?" "Ready as I'll ever be," I replied, though my stomach was already churning with anticipation. "Alex, about what you said yesterday, about handling whatever Victoria has planned." He pulled back slightly to look at me, and I saw something flicker across his expression. It was gone so quickly I might have imagined it, but for just a moment, he looked like he was weighing his words very carefully. "I just meant that you don't have to face her alone," he said finally. "Whatever happens tonight, we're a team. That's what partners do, right? They protect each other." There was truth in what he said, but it felt incomplete somehow, like he was giving me the simplified version of a much more complex reality. Still, as he kissed my forehead and got up to start the coffee, I decided to trust the feeling I'd had for 2 years. Alex loved me, whatever secrets he might be keeping, whatever resources he might have access to, his feelings for me were real. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel, my closest friend from work. Emergency coffee meeting. Victoria called the venue this morning asking about program modifications. Thought you should know. My blood ran cold. I showed Alex the message, and I watched his jaw tighten in a way that was becoming increasingly familiar. She's already started, I said, feeling panic rise in my chest. Rachel, what kind of modifications? I called her immediately, pacing Alex's small living room, while he listened from the kitchen. She told them she was calling on behalf of the Thompson family to coordinate some last-minute adjustments to the donor recognition segment, Rachel explained. Apparently she has documentation showing that she's been designated as the family representative for the event. That's impossible, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I realized it wasn't impossible at all. Victoria was methodical when she wanted something. If she'd convinced our parents that she needed to be involved for the sake of family reputation, they would have given her whatever documentation she needed. There's more, Rachel continued, and I could hear the reluctance in her voice. She also asked about adjusting the seating arrangements. Specifically, she wanted to know about moving the mystery donor to a more prominent table. My mind raced. Victoria's interest in the anonymous donor had been suspicious from the beginning, but now it was starting to feel like more than casual curiosity. Did she say why? She claimed it was about proper protocol for honoring major contributors, said the current arrangement didn't reflect the appropriate level of recognition for someone who donated $2 million. I sank onto Alex's couch, feeling the weight of realization settling over me. Victoria wasn't just trying to steal credit for my work. She was positioning herself to take advantage of whatever moment the donor reveal would create. If she could insert herself into that recognition, if she could make it appear that she was the one facilitating the connection between the donor and the foundation, she would effectively hijack the most important moment of the entire event. I have to get to the venue, I said, already mentally calculating how long it would take me to get downtown and start damage control. Mia. Wait, Alex said, appearing in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. Before you go charging in there, let's think about this strategically. I looked at him, noting again that subtle shift in his demeanor. He wasn't panicking or offering generic reassurances. He was analyzing the situation, like someone who understood political maneuvering and power dynamics. What do you mean? Alex set the coffee cups down and sat beside me on the couch. Victoria is moving early because she thinks she has an advantage. She thinks she knows something you don't, or she has leverage you can't counter. But what if that's not actually true? I don't understand. What if the reason she's so interested in the mystery donor isn't because she wants to steal credit, but because she thinks she already knows who it is? What if she's planning to use that knowledge somehow? The possibility hadn't occurred to me, but it made a disturbing amount of sense. Victoria had been asking pointed questions about the donor for weeks. If she'd somehow figured out their identity, she could be planning to approach them directly, to position herself as a more suitable partner for future philanthropic endeavors. But how could she know? I asked. The foundation has been incredibly careful about maintaining anonymity. Even I don't know who it is. Alex was quiet for a long moment, and I saw that careful expression cross his face again. Sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones with the biggest secrets, he said finally. There was something in his tone that made me look at him more closely. Alex, what aren't you telling me? He reached for my hands, holding them gently between his own. I'm telling you that Victoria doesn't have as much power as she thinks she does. I'm telling you that tonight is going to unfold in ways she can't predict or control. And I'm telling you that by the end of this evening, everyone will know exactly what you're capable of. You keep saying that, but you won't explain how you can be so sure. Because, he said, meeting my eyes with an intensity I'd never seen before, there are things about tonight that Victoria doesn't know, things that are going to shift the entire dynamic in your favor. Before I could ask what he meant, my phone rang. It was my mother, and I could hear the tension in her voice before she even spoke. Mia, darling, I hope you're ready for tonight. Victoria has been working so hard to make sure everything goes smoothly. The casual rewriting of reality was so typical of my family that I almost laughed. Victoria has been working hard to take over my event. You mean? Don't be dramatic, sweetheart. She's just trying to help. You know how important it is that everything reflects well on our family, especially with so many important people attending. Mother, this isn't about our family. This is about raising money for programs that help kids who don't have the advantages we had. There was a pause, and when my mother spoke again, her voice had that carefully controlled quality that meant she was about to deliver a lecture disguised as advice. Of course, dear, and that's wonderful, but you have to understand that these events are about more than just the immediate cause. They're about building relationships, establishing credibility, creating opportunities for future collaboration. Victoria understands these dynamics in a way that comes from experience. Experience stealing credit from other people's work. Mia Elizabeth Thompson, that is quite enough. My mother's voice turned sharp. Your sister has spent years building professional relationships in this city. She knows how to navigate high-stakes social situations. If she's offering to help ensure that tonight goes smoothly, you should be grateful, not resentful. I looked at Alex, who was listening with an expression of barely controlled anger. He'd never heard my family speak to me this way before, and I could see him struggling to stay silent. I have to go, Mother. I need to get to the venue and make sure my event actually happens the way I planned it. Your event, my mother repeated with a small laugh. Darling, nothing we do exists in isolation. Tonight reflects on all of us, and Victoria is just trying to protect that. After I hung up, Alex stood up abruptly and walked to the window. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched at his sides. How long have they treated you like this? He asked without turning around. Like what? Like you're not capable of handling your own life. Like everything you accomplish is somehow provisional, subject to their approval or modification. The question caught me off guard, partly because it was so direct, and partly because it forced me to acknowledge something I'd been avoiding. Always, I guess. It's just how our family works. Victoria is older, more successful, more connected. They trust her judgment. And what about your judgment? Alex turned to face me, and there was something fierce in his expression. What about the fact that you've spent 2 years building this program from nothing? What about the fact that you're the one who convinced the foundation to take a chance on a new approach to youth engagement? What about the fact that you're the one who found the donors, organized the logistics, created something meaningful out of thin air? His words hit me with unexpected force, partly because he was describing accomplishments I'd never heard anyone in my family acknowledge. To them, my work was a nice hobby, something that kept me busy while I figured out what I really wanted to do with my life. But Alex saw it differently. He saw it as building something important, creating real value in the world. They don't see it that way, I said quietly. Then they're blind. Alex replied firmly, and tonight everyone else is going to see what they've been missing. There was that certainty again, that confidence that seemed to come from knowledge I didn't have access to. But before I could ask more questions, my phone buzzed with another text from Rachel. Update: Victoria is at the venue now, meeting with the catering manager about adjustments to the program timeline. Also, she brought her own photographer. Thought you should know. Alex read the message over my shoulder, and I felt him tense beside me. She brought her own photographer, I said, feeling a new wave of anxiety. Why would she need her own photographer? Because she's planning something that requires documentation, Alex said grimly. Something she wants to make sure is recorded from her preferred angle. The pieces were starting to come together in a way that made my stomach drop. Victoria wasn't just trying to steal credit for the event. She was planning some kind of grand gesture, something that would position her as the real force behind the evening's success. The mystery donor, the program modifications, the photographer, it all pointed toward a calculated plan to upstage me at the moment of my greatest professional triumph. I have to stop this, I said, reaching for my jacket. No, Alex said, catching my arm gently. You have to trust me. Alex, I can't just let her destroy everything I've worked for. She's not going to destroy anything, he said with quiet conviction. She's going to expose herself, and you're going to get exactly the recognition you deserve. How can you possibly know that? Alex was quiet for a long moment, and I saw him making some kind of internal decision. When he spoke again, his voice was different, more serious than I'd ever heard it. Because Victoria is operating on incomplete information, he said. She thinks she knows how tonight is going to unfold, but she's missing crucial pieces of the puzzle. And when those pieces fall into place, everyone will see exactly who she is, and exactly who you are. What pieces? What information? The kind that changes everything, Alex said cryptically. Mia, I need you to do something for me. I need you to go to the venue, handle whatever crisis Victoria has created, and focus on making sure your event runs exactly the way you planned it. Can you do that? What are you going to be doing? Making sure that when the donor recognition happens tonight, everyone understands the real story behind it. There was something in his tone that made me study his face more carefully. He looked like he was preparing for something, like he was about to step into a role I'd never seen him play before. Alex, you're scaring me a little. You keep talking like you have some kind of plan, but you won't tell me what it is. He cupped my face gently, his thumbs brushing across my cheekbones. I'm not trying to scare you, I'm trying to protect you. There are things about tonight, about the donor, about why this event matters so much, that I haven't been able to tell you yet. But after tonight, you'll understand everything. Why can't you tell me now? Because, he said, pressing a soft kiss to my forehead, sometimes the best protection is not knowing until the moment when knowledge becomes power. I wanted to push for more information, but something in his expression told me he'd already said as much as he was going to. Instead, I focused on the practical reality facing me. Whatever Alex was planning, whatever he knew that I didn't, I still had an event to save. Will you be there tonight? I asked. I wouldn't miss it, he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. In fact, I think tonight might be the most important evening of both our lives. As I gathered my things and prepared to leave for the venue, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man I thought I knew was about to reveal himself as someone entirely different. The quiet, supportive freelance consultant, who'd won my heart with his genuine interest in community work and his complete lack of pretension, was showing glimpses of someone with resources, connections, and strategic thinking that went far beyond anything I'd imagined. But more than that, he was showing signs of someone who'd been preparing for this confrontation with Victoria for longer than just the past few days. Someone who understood the dynamics of power and manipulation in ways that suggested he'd encountered them before. Someone who spoke about changing the entire trajectory of the evening with the confidence of a person who held cards that no one else knew existed. As I drove toward downtown Portland, watching the city skyline grow larger against the cloudy October sky, I realized that tonight wasn't just about whether I could save my gala from Victoria's sabotage. It was about discovering who Alex really was, what he'd been hiding, and whether our relationship could survive the revelation of truths that might change everything I thought I knew about the life we'd been building together. The venue was already bustling with activity when I arrived, vendors and staff preparing for the evening's event, but the energy felt different somehow, charged with an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there during my previous visits. Victoria's presence was like a stone thrown into calm water, creating ripples that affected every interaction, every decision, every detail of the carefully planned evening. I found her in the main ballroom, standing near the stage with a tablet in one hand and her phone pressed to her ear. She was wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and her hair was styled in a way that suggested she was planning to be photographed extensively throughout the evening. "Yes, that's correct," she was saying into the phone. "The family representative will be handling the donor recognition personally. We want to make sure it receives the appropriate level of attention." Family representative. She was positioning herself as the official Thompson family liaison for the event, which meant she'd found a way to make her involvement seem not just legitimate but necessary. It was a brilliant political move, the kind of strategic thinking that had always made Victoria successful in her corporate career. When she saw me approaching, she ended her call with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mia, perfect timing. I was just coordinating some final details with the foundation board. We want to make sure tonight exceeds everyone's expectations." "What kind of details?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "Oh, just small things. Timing adjustments, presentation logistics, that sort of thing. Nothing that affects your wonderful behind-the-scenes coordination." The phrase "behind-the-scenes coordination" was delivered with just enough emphasis to make it clear that Victoria was relegating me to invisible support staff for my own event. It was masterfully done, technically respectful while completely undermining my authority. "Victoria, I appreciate your interest, but I've been planning this event for 6 months. Every detail has been carefully considered and approved by the foundation. I don't think we need last-minute modifications." "Of course you don't think we need them," Victoria replied with that patronizing smile I'd learned to hate. "You've done such thorough work on the foundational elements, but events like this require a certain level of sophistication in the presentation, especially when we're dealing with donors of this caliber." "Donors like who?" Victoria's smile widened and I saw a glint of triumph in her eyes. "Well, I suppose there's no harm in sharing, since you'll find out soon enough anyway. The anonymous donor isn't quite as mysterious as everyone thinks. In fact, it's someone our family has had business relationships with for years." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "The Harrison family, darling. Specifically, Marcus Harrison's son. Apparently he's been very quietly building a philanthropic portfolio, and tonight's donation is his way of stepping into public recognition for his charitable work." The name Harrison hit me like a physical blow. Alex Harrison. My fiancé was named Alex Harrison, and he'd told me he'd grown up in a middle-class Portland suburb. But if Victoria was right, if the mystery donor was a Harrison family member, then either it was an incredible coincidence or Alex had been lying to me about fundamental aspects of his identity for 2 years. "How do you know this?" I managed to ask. "Because," Victoria said with obvious satisfaction, "I make it my business to know these things. And because Marcus Harrison and father have been business associates for decades." When I heard about the anonymous donation, I put 2 and 2 together. Tonight isn't just about your little charity project, Mia. It's about our family's relationship with one of the most influential development companies in the Pacific Northwest. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. If Victoria was right, then Alex wasn't just keeping secrets about having money, he was keeping secrets about being connected to my family's business circles, about moving in the exact social stratum that I'd thought we were both separate from. Of course, Victoria continued. I'm sure young Harrison will appreciate having someone with experience in donor relations to facilitate the recognition process. These family dynamics can be so delicate, and it's important that everyone feels appropriately valued. She was planning to position herself as the liaison between the Harrison family and the foundation, effectively making herself the center of the most important moment of the evening. If she succeeded, the story wouldn't be about Mia Thompson organizing a successful fundraiser for youth programs. It would be about Victoria Thompson facilitating a major philanthropic partnership between established Portland families. I need to make some phone calls, I said, backing away from Victoria before she could see the panic in my eyes. Of course, dear, I'm sure you have lots of last-minute details to handle. I escaped to a quiet corner of the venue and immediately called Alex. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. I tried again with the same result. Either he was in a meeting, or he was avoiding my calls, and either possibility filled me with dread. Instead, I called the one person I knew would give me a straight answer about the Harrison family connection. Rachel. I need you to look something up for me. Harrison Real Estate, specifically Marcus Harrison and any family members involved in the business. Why? What's wrong? Victoria seems to think she knows who our mystery donor is, and if she's right, then either my fiancé has been lying to me for 2 years, or this is the most incredible coincidence in Portland history. There was a pause while Rachel processed what I was saying. Mia, what's Alex's last name? Harrison. Oh my God, okay, give me 5 minutes. I'm pulling up everything I can find. While I waited, I tried Alex's number again. This time, he answered on the first ring. Mia, I was hoping you'd call. Alex, I need you to answer a question for me, and I need you to be completely honest. Of course, are you related to Marcus Harrison of Harrison Real Estate? The silence on the other end of the line was answer enough, but when Alex finally spoke, his voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. Yes, he said quietly. He's my father. The simple admission hit me like a physical blow. For 2 years, I'd been dating the son of one of Portland's most successful real estate developers, and he'd let me believe he was a struggling freelance consultant, living paycheck to paycheck. He'd watched me stress about money, worry about career stability, feel insecure about my modest lifestyle, all while hiding the fact that he came from the exact kind of wealth and influence that my family had always valued above everything else. Mia, please let me explain. Explain what? I said, my voice shaking. Explain how you've been lying to me about who you are for 2 entire years. Explain how you've let me feel like we were building something together when you've been slumming it with the poor community organizer. It's not like that. Then what is it like, Alex? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been playing some kind of elaborate game, and I've been too naive to realize it. I need to see you, he said urgently. This isn't a conversation we should have over the phone. I can't see you right now, I have an event to save. Assuming there's anything left to save after Victoria finishes repositioning herself as the star of the evening. Mia, listen to me, Victoria doesn't know the whole story. She thinks she does, but she's operating on partial information, and that's going to be her downfall. What whole story? How many more secrets are you keeping? Secrets that I kept to protect you, Alex said firmly. Secrets that I'm going to reveal tonight in a way that ensures Victoria can never hurt you again. I don't want your protection, I said, feeling tears start to burn behind my eyes. I wanted your honesty. And you'll have it, he said. Tonight, you'll have all of it. But Mia, I need you to trust me for just a few more hours. Can you do that? I looked around the venue, watching vendors setting up the life's work that Victoria was systematically stealing from me, and realized that I didn't have any choice. Whether Alex was the man I thought he was, or someone completely different, whether his feelings for me were real or part of some elaborate deception, I still had an event to run and kids to help. I have to go. I said. Mia, wait, no Alex. Whatever you're planning, whatever you think you're going to reveal tonight, you should know that Victoria is already 10 steps ahead of you. She knows about your family, she's positioned herself as the liaison for the donor recognition, and she's brought her own photographer to document her triumph. So whatever cards you think you're holding, you better hope they're better than hers. I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking as I stared at the phone screen. The man I was supposed to marry in 3 weeks had just admitted to lying about his identity for our entire relationship. The sister who had spent my whole life undermining me was about to steal the biggest professional moment of my career. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I was supposed to focus on running an event that would determine whether vulnerable kids in Portland would have access to programs that could change their lives. The next few hours passed in a blur of vendor coordination and crisis management, but underneath every interaction was the growing realization that tonight would reshape everything I thought I knew about my life. Victoria had positioned herself perfectly to claim credit for the evening's success. Alex had revealed himself as someone completely different from who I'd believed him to be, and I was about to discover whether love could survive the weight of deception, no matter how well-intentioned it might have been. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, I was standing in the middle of chaos. The Sentinel Hotel ballroom had been transformed into something that barely resembled the elegant charity gala I'd spent months planning. Victoria had arrived with what appeared to be her own event coordination team, complete with additional lighting equipment, revised seating charts, and a timeline that bore no resemblance to the one I'd carefully crafted with the foundation board. "Excuse me, but who authorized these changes?" I asked the lighting technician who was repositioning spotlights around the stage area. "Miss Thompson said these were updates from the foundation," he replied, not bothering to look up from his work. "Something about better coverage for the donor recognition ceremony." Miss Thompson. Victoria had clearly established herself as the authority figure, and now even the vendors I'd worked with for months were taking direction from her instead of me. I felt that familiar sensation of being erased from my own life, watching as someone else stepped into the space I'd created and claimed it as their own. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at Laurelhurst Park in 20 minutes. We need to talk before tonight. Trust me one more time. Alex." I stared at the message, torn between fury and curiosity. Part of me wanted to ignore it entirely, to focus on salvaging what remained of my event without getting distracted by whatever explanation Alex thought he could offer. But another part of me needed to understand what was happening, needed to know if there was any truth left in the relationship I'd thought was the most honest part of my life. Victoria appeared at my elbow as I was still staring at my phone. "Problems, dear. Just coordinating with vendors," I said, slipping the phone into my pocket. "Of course, though I have to say, everyone has been so professional about adapting to the enhanced program. It's amazing how smoothly things run when you have the right connections." Enhanced program. She was rebranding her takeover as an improvement, positioning herself as the person who'd elevated my amateur efforts to professional standards. It was brilliant manipulation, the kind that would leave everyone believing she'd saved the event from potential disaster. "Victoria, can we talk privately for a minute?" She glanced at her watch with theatrical consideration. "Of course, but just for a moment. I have a call with the Harrison family representative in 15 minutes to finalize the recognition ceremony details." We found a quiet corner near the hotel's lobby, away from the controlled chaos of the ballroom setup. Victoria settled into one of the plush chairs with the casual elegance she'd perfected over the years, while I remained standing too agitated to sit still. "I know what you're doing," I said without preamble. Victoria's eyebrows rose in a perfect expression of innocent surprise. "What am I doing, sweetheart? You're systematically taking over my event. You've positioned yourself as the family representative, you've made unauthorized changes to the program, and you're planning to use the donor recognition as a way to establish yourself as the key relationship between the foundation and the Harrison family. Oh, Mia, Victoria said with a small laugh, you're being paranoid. I'm simply ensuring that everything runs smoothly. This is a significant moment for our family's reputation in the philanthropic community. This has nothing to do with our family's reputation. This is about you stealing credit for work that I've been doing for months. Victoria's expression shifted slightly, becoming more serious but not less condescending. Let me explain something to you about how these things actually work, she said, leaning forward in her chair. Events like this aren't just about the logistics, they're about relationships, influence, and long-term strategic partnerships. The Harrison donation isn't just a one-time gift, it's the beginning of what could be years of collaboration between their foundation and various Portland nonprofits. She paused, studying my face with calculating eyes. Now, who do you think is better positioned to nurture that relationship? You, with your community center background and your earnest little programs. Or me, with established connections in both families and experience in managing high-stakes business relationships. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. She wasn't just stealing my event, she was explaining why I didn't deserve it in the first place. In Victoria's worldview, my 2 years of relationship building, program development, and community engagement were irrelevant compared to her ability to network with wealthy donors. Those earnest little programs change kids' lives, I said, my voice shaking with anger. I'm sure they do, Victoria replied smoothly. And they'll continue to do so with much better funding once the right people are managing the donor relationships. You should be thanking me, really. I'm ensuring that your programs get the support they need. By making it look like you're the one who created that support. Victoria stood up, smoothing her dress with practiced movements. Mia, you need to understand something. Tonight isn't about you getting recognition, it's about securing the future of the programs you claim to care about. If my involvement ensures that the Harrison family continues their philanthropic relationship with the foundation, then everyone wins. Everyone except me. You win too, Victoria said with false sincerity. You get to see your programs funded at levels you never could have achieved on your own. You get to continue doing the work you love, without having to worry about the complex relationship management that you're frankly not equipped to handle. It was the final insult, delivered with the kind of casual dismissiveness that made it clear Victoria truly believed she was doing me a favor. In her mind, I should be grateful that she was taking over the difficult parts so I could continue playing in my small corner of nonprofit work. I have to go, I said, not trusting myself to say anything else without completely losing control. Of course, dear, I'm sure you have lots of last-minute details to handle. The vendor coordination really is important, even if it's not the most visible part of the evening. I left the hotel feeling like I'd been systematically dismantled. Victoria had taken my event, my relationships, and my future, and she'd done it all while making it sound like she was helping me. Worse, she'd done it in a way that would be almost impossible to counter without looking like a petty, ungrateful family member who couldn't appreciate assistance when it was offered. The drive to Laurelhurst Park gave me 20 minutes to think about whether I wanted to hear what Alex had to say. Part of me was still furious about the lies, about the 2 years of pretending to be someone he wasn't. But another part of me was desperate to understand why he'd hidden his identity, what he'd hoped to accomplish, and whether there was any way to salvage something real from the wreckage of everything I'd believed about our relationship. I found him sitting on our usual bench overlooking the pond, the same spot where we'd had countless conversations about our dreams, our fears, our plans for the future. He looked different somehow, less relaxed than usual, wearing a suit that I now realized probably cost more than my monthly rent. Even his posture was different, more formal, like he was preparing for a business meeting rather than a personal conversation. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down beside him, careful to leave space between us. "I'm here because I need to understand what's been real and what's been performance," I said. 2 years, Alex. For 2 years you let me believe we were building something together as equals. We were building something together, he said quietly. The feelings, the connection, the way we support each other, all of that is real. The only thing that wasn't real was my financial situation. Your financial situation and your family connections and your social status, and apparently your entire identity. Alex turned to face me, and I saw genuine pain in his expression. My name is Alex Harrison. I grew up in Portland. I went to college here. I care about this community, and I fell in love with a woman who dedicates her life to making it better. None of that is a lie. But you let me worry about money. You let me feel insecure about my career prospects. You watched me stress about whether we could afford the life we were planning together, all while knowing that you had access to resources that could solve every practical problem we faced. Because I wanted you to choose me for who I am, not what I could provide, Alex said urgently. I wanted to know that you loved Alex the person, not Alex the trust fund, so you made that choice for both of us. You decided that I was too shallow or too gold-digging to be trusted with the truth about who you are. That's not what I thought. Then what did you think? Alex was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the pond where ducks were gliding across the surface in the late afternoon light. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, like he was choosing each word with precision. I thought that once you knew about my family's money, everything would change. The way you saw our relationship, the way you saw your own achievements, the way other people saw us together. I wanted to protect what we had. By lying about it, by avoiding a complication that didn't seem relevant to who we were together. I felt a bitter laugh escape my throat. Not relevant. Alex, your family's wealth is exactly the kind of connection that my family has always valued above everything else. Do you have any idea what it's been like, growing up as the Thompson daughter who doesn't have the right connections, the right achievements, the right kind of success? And the whole time, I was dating someone who had exactly what they always said I was lacking, which is exactly why I didn't want it to matter. Alex said, I saw how your family treated you, how they made you feel like you weren't enough. I didn't want my background to become another way for them to diminish your accomplishments. Instead, you made it possible for my sister to steal the biggest accomplishment of my career. Alex's expression hardened. Victoria doesn't know the whole story, she knows enough. She knows about your family's connection to mine, she knows about the donation, and she's positioned herself perfectly to take credit for facilitating the relationship. By the time tonight is over, everyone will believe that she's the one who made the whole thing possible. No, Alex said with quiet certainty, they won't. How can you be so sure? Because Victoria is assuming that I'm going to follow the script she's written. She thinks I'm a young Harrison family member making his first major charitable donation, someone who needs guidance and support from experienced family friends like the Thompsons. Aren't you? Alex stood up from the bench, and suddenly he looked different again, more authoritative, more commanding, like someone who was used to being in control of complicated situations. I've been managing my own charitable foundation for 3 years, he said. The Portland Youth Initiative has provided funding for dozens of programs throughout the city, including several that compete directly with the projects Victoria's corporate clients are involved in. Tonight's donation isn't my first philanthropy, it's the public reveal of work I've been doing quietly for years. I stared at him trying to process what he was saying. You have your own foundation, I have my own foundation, my own board of directors, my own strategic plan for community investment, and my own very clear ideas about which local organizations deserve support and which ones are more interested in social positioning than actual impact. And you never thought to mention this. I was protecting you, Alex said again. If you'd known about my foundation work, you would have felt conflicted about accepting funding for your programs. You would have questioned whether your success was based on merit or favoritism. I wanted you to build your reputation independently, so instead you let me struggle and stress and worry about funding while you had the power to help all along. I helped in other ways. Volunteer work, emotional support, connections to other donors who weren't connected to me personally. But I wanted your professional success to be unquestionably yours. I felt tears starting to burn behind my eyes, not just from anger but from a complicated mix of betrayal and recognition. Alex had been trying to protect my independence while lying about his own identity. He'd been supporting my work while hiding his ability to transform it completely. His motivations might have been loving, but the deception felt like a fundamental violation of trust. What happens tonight? I asked. Tonight, Victoria discovers that the mysterious donor she's been trying to manipulate is someone who's been watching her tactics for months. Someone who's seen exactly how she treats you, how she undermines your work, how she uses family connections to steal opportunities you've earned. And then what? Then everyone else discovers it too. Alex sat back down beside me, and this time I didn't move away when his shoulder touched mine. Maya, I know you're angry about the lies, and you have every right to be, but I need you to understand something. Victoria has spent your entire life convincing people that she's more capable, more connected, more deserving of recognition and opportunities. Tonight is the night that everyone sees who she really is and who you really are. How? Because when I take the stage to accept recognition for the donation, I'm going to tell the truth about why I chose to support your programs specifically. I'm going to talk about the 2 years I've spent watching you build something meaningful from nothing, watching you create real change in kids' lives, watching you prove that authentic community engagement is worth more than all the networking and political maneuvering in the world. The image of Alex on stage, publicly praising my work while Victoria watched from the audience, sent a shiver through me. It would be the ultimate reversal, the moment when everyone realized that the person they should have been paying attention to all along was me, not my sister. But there's more, Alex continued. Victoria has been telling people that she's facilitating a relationship between our families, that she's the key to ongoing philanthropic partnerships. She's promised several board members that she can deliver additional Harrison family support for their projects. And you're going to let her know she was wrong. I'm going to let everyone know she was wrong. Because the decision about future funding isn't going to be made by my father or the family business. It's going to be made by me, based on my assessment of which organizations are actually creating impact versus which ones are just good at managing relationships. I looked at Alex, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time since we'd met. He wasn't the modest, struggling consultant I'd fallen in love with, but he also wasn't just another wealthy heir playing at philanthropy. He was someone who'd built his own identity and his own mission, someone who'd chosen to work quietly rather than seek recognition, someone who'd been protecting and supporting my dreams even when I didn't know it. There's something else you should know, Alex said carefully. Victoria has been trying to convince the foundation board that you're not ready for larger responsibilities. She's been suggesting that tonight's success should lead to her taking a more active role in program development and donor relations. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't enough for Victoria to steal credit for tonight's event. She was also trying to use it as a platform to take over my career entirely. She wants my job. She wants to position herself as the primary interface between the foundation and major donors. Essentially, she wants to make you irrelevant to the future of your own programs. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of how thoroughly I'd been outmaneuvered. Victoria hadn't just been planning to upstage me at one event, she'd been planning to replace me entirely to turn my life's work into a stepping stone for her own ambitions. But here's what she doesn't know, Alex said, his voice taking on that tone of quiet authority I was starting to recognize. The foundation's funding doesn't just come from tonight's donation. I've been working with the board for months on a long-term strategic plan that includes guaranteed funding for 3 years, renewable based on performance metrics that I'll be evaluating personally. You've been working with the board, under a different name, through intermediaries, but yes, I've been much more involved in the foundation's planning than Victoria realizes. Which means that when she tries to position herself as indispensable to future funding, everyone will already know that the real relationship is between my foundation and the people who've been doing the actual work. I opened my eyes and looked at him. People like me, people exactly like you. For the first time since learning about Alex's deception, I felt something other than anger and betrayal. I felt a spark of hope. A sense that maybe the evening didn't have to end with Victoria's triumph and my humiliation. Maybe there was a way to turn her own tactics against her, to use her assumptions and overconfidence to expose exactly who she was and what she'd been trying to do. Alex, if you'd told me about this from the beginning, we could have been planning together. We could have been partners in this instead of you protecting me from information I deserved to have. You're right, he said simply. I was trying to shield you from complications that weren't mine to decide about. I should have trusted you with the truth from the beginning, and after tonight, if we can get through this, what happens to us? Alex took my hands in his, and for the first time in hours, his touch felt familiar instead of strange. After tonight, no more secrets. After tonight, you know exactly who I am and what resources we have to work with. After tonight, we decide together how to use whatever advantages we have to continue building the kind of programs you care about. And Victoria, after tonight, Victoria discovers that her entire strategy was based on fundamental misunderstandings about power, relationships, and who actually makes decisions about the things she wants to control. I leaned back against the bench, watching the late afternoon light reflect off the pond and thinking about the choice I was facing. I could walk away from Alex, end our engagement, and focus on salvaging what remained of my professional reputation after Victoria's takeover. Or I could decide to trust him one more time, to believe that his deception had been motivated by love rather than manipulation, and to work with him to create the kind of public revelation that would change everyone's understanding of our family dynamics. If we do this, I said carefully, if we go through with whatever you're planning for tonight, there's no going back. My relationship with Victoria, with my parents, with everyone who's enabled this pattern for years, it's all going to change permanently. Is that what you want? I thought about the question seriously, imagining a future where I didn't have to constantly defend my choices, where my accomplishments weren't automatically diminished in favor of Victoria's, where I could build my career based on merit rather than family politics. Yeah, I said finally, I think it is. Alex smiled, and for the first time since I'd discovered his lies, it felt like the smile of the man I'd fallen in love with, rather than a stranger wearing his face. Then let's give Victoria exactly what she thinks she wants, he said. Let's let her take center stage, position herself as the key to everything, make all the promises she wants to make about future partnerships and ongoing relationships. And then we show everyone what really happens when someone tries to take credit for other people's work and make promises they can't keep. As we sat there planning Victoria's downfall, I realized that Alex had been right about one thing. Tonight was going to change everything. Not just about my relationship with my family, but about my understanding of my own worth and capabilities. For the first time in my life, I was going to stop being the victim of Victoria's manipulations and start being the architect of her exposure. The sun was starting to set over Portland, casting long shadows across the park, and in a few hours, I would walk into the ballroom of the Sentinel Hotel as someone Victoria had dismissed and underestimated. But I would leave as someone who had finally learned to fight back, someone who had discovered that the best revenge wasn't anger or retaliation. It was simply letting the truth speak for itself. The evening of the gala arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Portland feel electric with possibility. I stood in my apartment, adjusting the emerald green dress I'd chosen months ago, back when I'd imagined this night would be a simple celebration of community achievement. Now, as I looked at my reflection, I saw someone preparing for battle. The woman staring back at me had spent the day coordinating final details while watching Victoria systematically position herself as the evening's true architect. But she had also spent the afternoon learning that her fiancé wasn't who she'd thought he was, that her sister's manipulation ran deeper than she'd imagined, and that tonight would determine not just the success of one event, but the entire trajectory of her future. My phone buzzed with a series of texts from Rachel, who was already at the venue managing last-minute logistics. Victoria brought 3 photographers and a videographer. She's set up what looks like a private receiving area near the stage. Also, she's wearing a dress that's basically a wedding gown in champagne. Thought you should be prepared. The image of Victoria dressed like a bride at my event sent a chill through me, but it also confirmed everything Alex had predicted. She wasn't just stealing credit, she was staging her own coronation, positioning herself as the central figure in what she imagined would be a career-defining moment of philanthropic facilitation. Another text arrived, this one from an unknown number. The car will be there in 10 minutes. Everything is in place. Trust the process. Alex had insisted on sending a car, though he'd refused to explain why that was necessary. In fact, he'd been maddeningly vague about the specific logistics of his plan, telling me only that I should arrive at the venue at exactly 7:30 and let Victoria have her moment in the spotlight until the donor recognition ceremony began at 8:15. The lack of detail made me nervous, but after yesterday's conversation in the park, I decided to trust that he knew what he was doing. The car that arrived was not the modest sedan I'd expected, but a sleek black town car with a driver who addressed me as Miss Thompson, with the kind of professional deference that suggested this wasn't Alex's first time arranging high-end transportation. As we glided through downtown Portland toward the Sentinel Hotel, I caught glimpses of my old life through the tinted windows. The community center where I'd spent the last 3 years, the coffee shops where Alex and I had planned our modest future, the apartment building where I'd worried about rent payments while dating someone who could have bought the entire complex without thinking about it. The Sentinel Hotel was glowing with warm light when we arrived, and I could see through the lobby windows that the ballroom was already filled with guests. Portland's philanthropic elite were mingling with foundation board members, community leaders, and the families whose children would benefit from tonight's fundraising efforts. It should have been a perfect moment, the culmination of everything I'd worked toward. Instead, it felt like walking into a carefully orchestrated trap where I didn't know whether I was the hunter or the prey. Rachel intercepted me the moment I walked through the lobby. "Mia, we need to talk. Victoria has been introducing herself to guests as the Thompson family representative coordinating tonight's donor relations. She's basically positioned herself as the hostess of your event. How are people responding? That's the weird part. Most of the foundation board seems confused about why she's here, but they're being polite. However, there are several people I don't recognize who seem to know exactly who she is and why she's important. They're treating her like she's running the show." The unknown guests had to be Victoria's corporate connections, people who'd been told that tonight represented a major networking opportunity with the Harrison family. She'd clearly prepared for this evening far more extensively than I'd realized, bringing her own audience to witness her triumph. "Where's Alex?" Rachel glanced around the lobby with a puzzled expression. "That's another weird thing. I haven't seen him yet, but there's a whole section of reserved seating that's been cordoned off. Security guards, fancy programs, the works. Someone very important is expected, but nobody seems to know who." My stomach tightened with nervousness and anticipation. Alex had promised that Victoria was operating on incomplete information, but I was beginning to realize that I was also operating on incomplete information. Whatever he had planned was clearly more elaborate than he'd let on. "I should probably make an appearance before things get started," I said, though part of me wanted to hide in the lobby until whatever was about to happen had finished happening. The ballroom was even more transformed than it had been that afternoon. Victoria's lighting adjustments had created a dramatic atmosphere that emphasized the stage area, and her seating rearrangements had positioned certain tables prominently while moving others toward the back. My community center colleagues were scattered throughout the room, looking slightly overwhelmed by the formal elegance that had replaced the warm, welcoming atmosphere I'd originally planned. I spotted Victoria near the stage, surrounded by a group of people who were hanging on her every word. She was wearing a dress that was, as Rachel had warned, essentially a bridal gown in pale champagne. Her hair was styled in an elaborate updo that had clearly required professional assistance, and she was carrying herself with the regal bearing of someone who believed she was the guest of honor rather than a last-minute addition to the guest list. "Mia, darling," she called out when she noticed me approaching. "Perfect timing. I was just explaining to everyone how excited our family is about tonight's partnership announcement." She was already framing the donor recognition as something she had facilitated, something that represented a business relationship between families rather than a charitable donation to community programs. Actually, I said with a smile that felt more confident than I expected, tonight is about celebrating the incredible work our youth programs have accomplished and the generous support that will help them expand their impact. Victoria's smile flickered slightly, but she recovered quickly. Of course, dear, the programs are wonderful, but the real excitement is about the ongoing relationship this represents. The Harrison family's commitment to Portland philanthropy is just beginning. One of the men in Victoria's circle, someone I didn't recognize but who radiated corporate authority, stepped forward with interest. Miss Thompson, your sister mentioned that your family has been working closely with Harrison Real Estate on coordinating this donation. Are there additional development projects planned that will include community investment components? The question revealed exactly what Victoria had been promising people. She wasn't just taking credit for tonight's event, she was suggesting that she had access to ongoing business opportunities, that she could deliver future partnerships and development deals that would benefit everyone in her network. I think there might be some confusion, I began, but Victoria smoothly interrupted. Mia has been focused on the program development side. Naturally, the broader strategic relationships are being handled through different channels. It was masterfully done. Victoria had positioned me as a junior participant in my own event, while claiming authority over aspects she had no actual control over. She was making promises she couldn't keep to people who had power she wanted to access, and she was using my work as the foundation for her entire deception. Before I could respond, the lights dimmed slightly, and the Foundation's board president approached the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please take your seats, we're ready to begin tonight's program. As people moved toward their tables, Victoria touched my arm with false sisterly affection. You should be proud, Mia. Tonight is going to be remembered as a turning point for Portland philanthropy. Our family is about to become much more influential in the charitable community. Our family, she was already claiming shared credit for whatever she imagined was about to happen. I took my assigned seat at a table near the stage, watching as Victoria glided toward what appeared to be a place of honor at the front of the room. The reserved section Rachel had mentioned was still empty, cordoned off with elegant rope barriers, and guarded by hotel security who checked their watches with professional precision. The program began with the Foundation president's welcome remarks, followed by presentations from several program beneficiaries. Kids from the after-school programs I'd helped develop spoke about how the services had changed their lives, and their parents shared stories about the difference community support had made for their families. It was exactly the kind of authentic, heartfelt testimony that reminded everyone why we were doing this work in the first place. But throughout the presentations, I kept noticing Victoria's behavior. She was clearly waiting for something, checking her phone repeatedly, and glancing toward the reserved section with barely contained anticipation. Whatever she thought was about to happen, she believed it would be the moment when her entire strategy paid off. Finally, the Foundation president returned to the microphone for the evening's main event. Tonight we have the privilege of recognizing a remarkable act of generosity that will transform our ability to serve Portland's young people. Our anonymous donor has provided $2 million to fund expanded programming, new facilities, and innovative approaches to youth development. The room filled with appreciative applause, and I felt a surge of genuine pride. Whatever happened next, whatever personal drama was about to unfold, this money would create real opportunities for kids who needed them. That was what mattered most, regardless of who received public recognition. But before we acknowledge this extraordinary gift, the president continued, I want to share something that makes it even more meaningful. Our donor didn't just write a check, he spent months researching our programs, meeting with our staff, and understanding the specific challenges facing Portland's young people. He chose to support us, not because of networking opportunities or family connections, but because he believed in the effectiveness of our approach. I saw Victoria straighten in her chair, preparing for what she clearly believed would be her moment of triumph. She had positioned herself perfectly to be the bridge between the mystery donor and the foundation, the facilitator who would claim credit for bringing together two important Portland institutions. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Alex Harrison, founder of the Portland Youth Initiative, and tonight's distinguished donor. The room erupted in applause, but I barely heard it. Alex walked onto the stage, wearing a perfectly tailored tuxedo, moving with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to public speaking and formal recognition. This wasn't the modest freelance consultant I'd been dating. This was someone who belonged in rooms like this, someone who commanded respect and attention simply by walking into a space. But it was Victoria's reaction that truly captured my attention. She had gone completely pale, her carefully composed expression cracking into something that looked like shock and confusion. She was staring at Alex like she was seeing a ghost, like the entire evening had just taken a turn she hadn't anticipated and didn't understand. Alex approached the microphone with calm professionalism, pausing to let the applause fade before he began to speak. "Thank you for that warm welcome. It's an honor to be here tonight supporting an organization that has consistently demonstrated its commitment to creating real change in our community." His voice carried easily through the ballroom, and I realized that public speaking was clearly not new to him. He was comfortable at the podium, experienced at addressing formal audiences, someone who had done this many times before. The Portland Youth Initiative has been quietly supporting community programs throughout the city for several years, Alex continued. But tonight's donation represents something special. It represents our recognition of work that is already succeeding, programs that are already making a difference, and leadership that has already proven its effectiveness. I felt my heart rate accelerate as I realized where this was heading. Alex wasn't just acknowledging the foundation's work in general terms, he was building towards something specific, something that would reshape everyone's understanding of why he had chosen to make this donation. When I first encountered the work being done by Mia Thompson and her team at the community center, I was impressed by their innovative approaches to youth engagement. But as I continued to observe their programs over the past 2 years, I became convinced that they represented exactly the kind of authentic community investment that philanthropic support should prioritize. 2 years, he was telling the entire room that he'd been watching my work for 2 years, that his donation was specifically based on his assessment of my programs and my leadership. Victoria was sitting frozen in her chair, clearly realizing that her entire strategy had been built on fundamentally incorrect assumptions. "Miss Thompson has built something remarkable," Alex continued, and I felt tears starting to burn behind my eyes. "She has created programs that don't just serve young people, they empower them. She has developed approaches that don't just address immediate needs, they build long-term capabilities. And she has done all of this while maintaining the kind of authentic community connection that makes sustainable change possible." The applause that followed was warm and genuine, and I saw people turning to look at me with expressions of recognition and respect. For the first time in my life, I was being publicly acknowledged, not as Victoria's younger sister or the Thompson daughter with the modest career, but as someone who had built something meaningful and valuable. But Alex wasn't finished. The Portland Youth Initiative support for these programs isn't a one-time donation, it represents the beginning of a 3-year partnership that will provide guaranteed funding for expansion, professional development, and innovative program design. Ms. Thompson and her team have earned our confidence, and they will have the resources they need to continue their exceptional work. I saw Victoria's face crumple slightly as she realized what Alex was saying. He wasn't just praising my work, he was announcing ongoing support that had been arranged independently of any family connections or corporate networking. The partnership she had been promising her colleagues didn't exist, and the influence she had been claiming was entirely imaginary. "There's one more thing I want to share," Alex said, and his tone shifted slightly, becoming more personal. 2 years ago, I met an extraordinary woman at a small charity event. She was coordinating volunteers, managing logistics, and somehow finding time to have meaningful conversations with every person who walked through the door. I was immediately struck by her genuine commitment to community service and her remarkable ability to see potential where others saw only problems. My breath caught as I realized he was talking about the night we met, but from a perspective I'd never heard before. That woman became my partner in every sense of the word. She challenged me to think more carefully about effective philanthropy. She showed me what authentic community engagement looks like. And she proved to me every day that the most meaningful change happens when people who truly care about others are given the resources and support they need to do their best work. The room had gone completely quiet, and I could feel everyone's attention focused on Alex's words. I asked that woman to marry me 6 months ago, and she said yes. Tonight I want everyone to know that Mia Thompson isn't just an exceptional community leader, she's also the person who taught me what it means to use privilege responsibly and what it looks like when someone dedicates their life to serving others. The applause that erupted was thunderous, but I was barely aware of it. Alex was looking directly at me from the stage, and his expression was filled with love, pride, and what looked like relief. He had just told a room full of Portland's most influential people that I wasn't just the recipient of his charitable donation, I was the inspiration for his entire approach to philanthropy. But more than that, he had just made it clear to everyone present that Victoria's promises about ongoing family partnerships and business relationships had been completely empty. The donor she had been claiming to represent was already committed to someone else, both professionally and personally. As Alex left the stage to another round of applause, I saw Victoria push back from her table and head toward the lobby. Her carefully orchestrated evening had just collapsed around her, and she was clearly trying to escape before anyone could ask her to explain the discrepancies between what she had promised and what had actually been announced. But I wasn't ready to let her disappear quietly. For the first time in my life, I had the power to confront Victoria's manipulations directly, and I intended to use it. I followed her into the hotel lobby, where she was standing near the windows overlooking the city, her perfectly composed facade finally cracking under the weight of her public humiliation. "Victoria," I said, approaching her carefully. She turned to face me, and I saw tears of rage and embarrassment in her eyes. "You planned this," she said accusingly. "You and him, you planned this whole thing to humiliate me." "No," I replied honestly, "I planned an event to raise money for youth programs. You decided to try to steal it and use it for your own advancement." "I was trying to help," Victoria said, though her voice lacked conviction. "You were trying to help yourself. You saw an opportunity to position yourself as important to people you wanted to impress, and you didn't care that it meant undermining everything I'd worked for." Victoria stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something I'd never seen before in her expression. It wasn't just anger or embarrassment, it was the dawning realization that her lifelong strategy of manipulating family dynamics to her advantage had finally stopped working. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she asked finally. "Those people in there, they're going to remember this. They're going to remember that I promised them access and relationships that I couldn't deliver. Maybe you should have thought about that before you made promises you had no right to make. And what about our family? What about the relationships I've spent years building in this community?" I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and realized that I felt something I'd never experienced before. I felt sorry for her. Sorry that she'd built her entire identity around manipulating others instead of developing genuine capabilities. Sorry that she'd spent so much energy on schemes and positioning that she'd never learned to create actual value. Sorry that she was about to discover what it felt like to lose everything she thought made her important. "Victoria," I said gently, "our family's relationships should never have been built on your ability to take credit for other people's work." Before she could respond, Alex appeared beside me, having made his way through the crowd of people who had wanted to congratulate him after his speech. "Miss Thompson," he said formally, addressing Victoria with the kind of polite distance reserved for business acquaintances. "I hope you enjoyed this evening's program." Victoria looked back and forth between us, and I saw her struggling to find some angle, some way to salvage something from the wreckage of her plans. "Alex," she said with forced brightness, "I had no idea about your foundation work. Perhaps we could discuss potential collaboration opportunities. Our family has extensive connections in the Portland business community." I appreciate the offer, Alex replied smoothly, but the Portland Youth Initiative has very specific criteria for partnerships. We work exclusively with organizations and individuals who have demonstrated authentic commitment to community service over personal advancement. The polite rejection was devastating in its precision. Alex wasn't just declining Victoria's offer, he was explaining exactly why she didn't qualify for consideration. Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. "You don't deserve this," she said, turning back to me with venom in her voice. "You don't deserve him. You don't deserve this recognition. You don't deserve any of it. I'm the one who's worked for everything I have. I'm the one who's built real relationships and real influence." "Built on what foundation?" I asked quietly. "Built by taking credit for other people's accomplishments? Built by manipulating family connections you didn't earn? Built by promising access to resources you don't control?" "I've worked harder than you ever have," Victoria spat. "You've worked harder at getting recognition. I've worked at actually helping people." The distinction hung in the air between us, and I saw Victoria realize that she had no response to it. Her entire argument was based on the assumption that recognition and influence were more valuable than impact and authenticity, and she was finally facing someone who rejected that premise entirely. "This isn't over," Victoria said finally, though her voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. "Yes, it is," Alex said calmly. "As of tonight, everyone knows exactly who facilitated this partnership and who tried to claim credit for it. Everyone knows who has been building effective programs and who has been building personal networks. Everyone knows who represents authentic community commitment and who represents opportunistic self-promotion." Victoria looked between us one more time, and I saw her realize that she had lost more than just tonight's battle. She had lost the entire war, the lifelong campaign to position herself as more important, more valuable, more deserving than me. Her strategy had finally been exposed for what it was, and there was no way to rebuild her credibility after such a public miscalculation. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the hotel's exit, her champagne-colored dress trailing behind her like the remnants of a failed coronation. Alex and I stood together in the lobby watching Portland's lights twinkle through the windows, and I realized that the evening had accomplished something far more significant than fundraising or recognition. It had finally shifted the balance of power in my family permanently and irrevocably. "So," I said, turning to face the man I was going to marry, the man who had spent 2 years protecting and supporting my dreams while hiding his own identity, "no more secrets, no more secrets," Alex confirmed, pulling me into his arms. "From now on, we build everything together, with complete honesty about who we are and what we're capable of." As he kissed me in the elegant lobby of the Sentinel Hotel, surrounded by the soft murmur of guests discussing the evening's revelations, I realized that I was finally free. Free from Victoria's manipulations, free from my family's dismissive expectations, free from the belief that I had to prove my worth by competing for scraps of recognition and approval. I was Mia Thompson, founder of programs that changed children's lives, partner to a man who had chosen me not despite my modest background, but because of my authentic commitment to service, and someone who had finally learned the difference between earning respect and demanding it. The youth programs would continue to grow and thrive, funded by people who believed in their mission rather than their networking potential. Victoria would have to rebuild her reputation from scratch, assuming she learned enough from tonight's disaster to change her approach entirely. And Alex and I would move forward together, combining our resources and our shared values to create the kind of impact that neither of us could achieve alone. 3 weeks later, we were married in a small ceremony in Laurelhurst Park, surrounded by the community center kids whose lives had brought us together and the colleagues who had supported my work from the beginning. Victoria wasn't there, having accepted a job transfer to Seattle that conveniently removed her from Portland's philanthropic community. My parents attended, though they spent most of the reception looking confused about how their overlooked daughter had suddenly become the center of their social circle's attention. But the most meaningful moment of the entire day came when Alex and I were alone for a few minutes during the reception, watching our guests celebrate under the autumn trees. "Any regrets?" he asked, referring not just to the wedding but to everything that had led up to it. "Just one," I said, smiling at his expression of concern. "I regret that it took me so long to realize that I didn't need anyone else's permission to be proud of what I'd built." Alex laughed and pulled me closer. "Well, now you have the rest of our lives to practice taking credit for your own accomplishments." As we rejoined our celebration, I realized that the best revenge against people who try to diminish you isn't anger or retaliation. It's simply living well, building something meaningful, and surrounding yourself with people who see your worth clearly. Victoria had spent our entire lives trying to prove she was better than me, but she had never bothered to become someone worth being. I had spent those same years focused on creating value for others, and in the end that difference had made all the difference. The aftermath of Alex's revelation rippled through the ballroom like electricity through water. I watched from my table as conversations shifted, as people pulled out their phones to research the Portland Youth Initiative, as Victoria's carefully cultivated network began to understand the magnitude of her miscalculation. The woman who had spent the evening positioning herself as the architect of a major philanthropic partnership was now sitting alone at her prominent table, abandoned by the corporate allies who had suddenly realized she had no actual influence to offer them. But Victoria wasn't someone who accepted defeat gracefully, and I could see her regrouping even as the foundation president returned to the microphone to announce the evening's fundraising totals. She was checking her phone, making quick calls, and I recognized the look of someone who was already planning her next move. Victoria had built her entire adult life around the ability to manipulate situations to her advantage, and she wasn't going to let one evening of public embarrassment destroy everything she'd worked to establish. Alex returned to our table as the formal program concluded, and guests began moving toward the reception area for dinner and dancing. He looked different now that his secret was out, more relaxed but also more authoritative. The careful modesty he'd maintained for 2 years had been replaced by the natural confidence of someone who was comfortable with his own power and influence. "How are you feeling?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me and reaching for my hand. "Like I'm still processing what just happened," I admitted. "Alex, that speech wasn't just about the donation. You essentially told everyone in this room that I'm the reason you got involved in Portland philanthropy." "Because it's true," he said simply. "Mia, I grew up with access to resources and opportunities that most people never have, but I also grew up around people who used those advantages to benefit themselves rather than their communities. Meeting you showed me what it looked like when someone with genuine passion and commitment was given the chance to make a difference." "So you've been studying me for 2 years." Alex smiled at the accusation in my tone. "I've been learning from you for 2 years. There's a difference." Before I could respond, Rachel appeared at our table with an expression that mixed excitement and concern. "Mia, we need to talk. Victoria just cornered 3 board members near the bar, and she's telling them that tonight's announcement was premature, that there are family complications that need to be resolved before the partnership can move forward." My stomach dropped. Of course, Victoria wasn't going to simply accept public humiliation and retreat quietly. She was already working to undermine Alex's announcement, to create doubt about the stability of the funding commitment. "What kind of family complications?" Alex asked, and I heard something sharp in his voice. "She's claiming that there are business relationships between the Harrison and Thompson families that predate tonight's announcement, and that those relationships create potential conflicts of interest for the foundation partnership." I felt my anger flare. Victoria was trying to use her family connection to me as leverage, suggesting that Alex's donation was somehow compromised by personal relationships rather than based on programmatic merit. She's also telling people that the foundation board should have been informed about personal relationships before accepting such a large donation, Rachel continued. "She's making it sound like there was some kind of ethical violation." Alex stood up abruptly, his expression hardening in a way I'd never seen before. "Excuse me for a moment," he said, and I watched him walk toward the bar area with purposeful strides. I followed him, curious to see how he would handle Victoria's latest manipulation. As we approached the group near the bar, I could hear Victoria's voice carrying over the ambient noise of the reception. "I'm just saying that the board should have been made aware of these relationships from the beginning," she was saying to Dr. Martinez, the foundation's longtime board chair. "When personal and professional interests become entangled, it raises questions about motivation and oversight." "Miss Thompson," Alex said, approaching the group with calm authority, "I think there might be some confusion about the foundation's due diligence process." Victoria turned toward him with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Alex, wonderful speech tonight. I was just discussing with Dr. Martinez how important transparency is in philanthropic partnerships." "Absolutely," Alex agreed smoothly. "Which is why I'm sure you'll be interested to know that the Portland Youth Initiatives Board conducted a 6-month evaluation process before approving tonight's donation. That evaluation included full disclosure of all potential conflicts of interest, including my personal relationship with Miss Mia Thompson." Dr. Martinez nodded with obvious relief. "That's correct. We were aware of Mr. Harrison's engagement from the beginning of our discussions. In fact, that personal connection was considered an asset rather than a liability, since it demonstrated his long-term commitment to understanding our programs from multiple perspectives." I saw Victoria's confident expression flicker as she realized that her attempt to create doubt about the foundation's process was backfiring. Alex had been more thorough and more professional than she'd anticipated. "Furthermore," Alex continued, "the Portland Youth Initiative's funding commitment is guaranteed by an irrevocable trust that removes any possibility of personal relationships affecting ongoing support. The Foundation's partnership is secure regardless of any changes in my personal circumstances." The board members looked impressed by the level of financial planning Alex had put into place, and I realized he'd anticipated exactly this kind of challenge to the partnership's legitimacy. But Victoria wasn't finished. "Of course, that's all very reassuring," she said with practiced smoothness. "I'm just concerned about how this will look to other potential donors. The Thompson family has worked hard to build relationships in Portland's philanthropic community, and we want to make sure nothing damages the foundation's reputation." It was a masterful threat, suggesting that her family's disapproval could somehow hurt the foundation's future fundraising efforts. She was positioning herself as someone whose goodwill was necessary for the organization's success. "I appreciate your concern, Dr. Martinez replied diplomatically, "but I think tonight's response speaks for itself. We've had more inquiries about partnership opportunities in the past 2 hours than we typically receive in 6 months." Victoria's face went pale as she realized that her influence was not only unnecessary but potentially counterproductive. The foundation was experiencing exactly the kind of positive attention she'd claimed to be able to provide, but it was happening despite her involvement rather than because of it. "If you'll excuse us," Alex said politely, "I'd like to introduce Mia to some colleagues from other youth organizations who are interested in collaborative programming." As we walked away from the group, I could feel Victoria's eyes burning into my back. She had just been politely but definitively dismissed from a conversation about the future of programs she'd been trying to control, and she had to be realizing that her window of opportunity was closing rapidly. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of congratulations, networking opportunities, and conversations about expanding the foundation's impact. Alex introduced me to foundation directors from Seattle, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, who were interested in replicating our programming models in their cities. Board members from other Portland nonprofits asked about collaboration opportunities. Local government officials discussed policy initiatives that could support our work. For the first time in my professional life, I was being treated as an expert rather than an assistant, a leader rather than a supporter. People wanted to hear my ideas, understand my methods, and learn from my experience. It was intoxicating and terrifying and absolutely thrilling. But throughout the evening I remained aware of Victoria's presence. She had regrouped after her failed attempt to undermine the foundation partnership, and she was working the room with desperate efficiency. I watched her approach donor after donor, corporate leader after corporate leader, trying to establish new connections and rebuild her credibility. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Victoria finally approached Alex and me directly. She had clearly been drinking, and her carefully maintained composure was fraying around the edges. "Mia, darling," she said with false warmth, "I hope you're happy with how everything turned out tonight. I'm happy that we raised enough money to expand programming for kids who need it," I replied carefully. "Of course the programs are important," Victoria said with a dismissive wave, "but I hope you understand what you've really accomplished tonight. You've damaged relationships that took years to build. You've embarrassed our family in front of people who matter. You've made it clear that you think you're too good for the support system that made your success possible." The accusation was so typical of Victoria's approach that I almost laughed. Even in defeat, she was trying to make me feel guilty for refusing to enable her manipulation. "Victoria," I said quietly, "my success tonight had nothing to do with family support systems. It had to do with 2 years of building effective programs and earning the respect of people who actually understand this work. You think you did this alone?" Victoria's voice was getting louder, attracting attention from the remaining guests. "You think you could have organized an event like this, attracted donors like Alex, built any of this without the advantages you've had your entire life?" "What advantages?" I asked genuinely. "The advantage of being constantly compared to you and found lacking. The advantage of having my achievements dismissed as lucky breaks. The advantage of being told that I needed your help to succeed at my own job." Victoria stared at me for a moment, and I saw something crack in her expression. For just an instant, she looked less like the polished corporate executive and more like the scared older sister who had spent her entire life trying to prove she was worthy of love and attention. "You don't understand," she said, her voice suddenly smaller. "Everything I've built, everything I've worked for, it's all about proving that I deserve to be here, that I deserve respect and recognition and success. But that's the difference between us," I said with sudden clarity. "I've been working to deserve the impact I can make on other people's lives. You've been working to deserve recognition for yourself." The distinction hung in the air between us, and I saw Victoria realize that she had no response to it. Her entire worldview was built on the assumption that external validation was the ultimate goal, and she was facing someone who had found meaning in something else entirely. Alex, who had been listening to our exchange with careful attention, stepped closer to me. "Victoria, I think you should know that the Portland Youth Initiative has a very clear policy about partnerships and collaborations. We work exclusively with people and organizations who demonstrate genuine commitment to community service rather than personal advancement." "What does that mean?" Victoria asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. "It means that as long as you continue to approach philanthropy as a networking opportunity rather than a service opportunity, you won't be included in any of our future initiatives." The finality of Alex's statement hit Victoria like a physical blow. He wasn't just rejecting her current proposals, he was permanently excluding her from the philanthropic community she'd been trying to infiltrate. "You can't do that," Victoria said desperately. "Our families have business relationships. There are connections that go beyond your personal preferences." "Actually," Alex replied calmly, "I can do exactly that. The Portland Youth Initiative is independent of Harrison Real Estate, and I make all funding decisions based on my own assessment of programmatic merit and organizational integrity." Victoria looked back and forth between us, and I saw her finally understand the complete scope of her miscalculation. She had assumed that family connections would give her access to ongoing opportunities, but Alex was making it clear that those connections were irrelevant to his philanthropic work. "This isn't over," Victoria said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Yes, it is," I replied firmly. "Victoria, for the first time in our lives, you can't take something away from me. You can't diminish my achievements, you can't claim credit for my work, and you can't manipulate family dynamics to undermine my success. And why is that? Because what I've built has nothing to do with you. The programs work because they're designed well, not because of family connections." The funding is secure because it's based on results, not relationships. And the recognition I'm receiving is based on merit, not manipulation. Victoria stared at me for a long moment, and I saw her realize that everything she'd tried to steal or undermine was simply beyond her reach. Her tactics only worked when I cared about her approval or feared her disapproval, and I had finally stopped doing both. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the exit, her champagne dress trailing behind her like the remnants of a failed campaign. Alex and I stood together in the nearly empty ballroom, watching the hotel staff begin the cleanup process. The evening that had started with Victoria's attempted takeover was ending with her complete defeat and my absolute vindication. "So," Alex said, pulling me into his arms, "how do you feel about being permanently free from your sister's interference?" "Like I can finally breathe," I admitted. "Alex, I know we still need to talk about the lies, about the secrets you kept, about rebuilding trust between us." "We do," he agreed. "But I want you to know that everything I said tonight was true. I fell in love with who you are, not what I could provide for you. The resources and connections I have access to, they're tools we can use to expand the work you're already doing, not replacements for your own capabilities. And no more secrets." "No more secrets," Alex promised. "From now on, we build everything together with complete honesty about who we are and what we can accomplish." As we left the Sentinel Hotel and walked out into the crisp Portland night, I realized that the evening had accomplished something far more significant than fundraising or recognition. It had finally freed me from the need to prove my worth to people who had never been willing to see it in the first place. Victoria would eventually rebuild her career, probably in another city where her family name still carried weight, and her manipulation tactics hadn't been publicly exposed. My parents would continue to struggle with understanding how their overlooked daughter had suddenly become more successful than their golden child. And the Portland philanthropic community would remember tonight as the moment when authentic community commitment was finally valued more highly than networking sophistication. But for me, the most important outcome was simpler and more personal. I was finally free to be proud of what I'd accomplished without worrying about who might try to take credit for it. I was free to build programs based on community needs rather than family expectations, and I was free to love and be loved by someone who saw my work as valuable for its own sake rather than as a reflection of his charity or social status. 6 months later, Alex and I were married in a ceremony at the community center where I worked, surrounded by the kids and families whose lives had brought us together. Victoria wasn't there, having accepted a position with a consulting firm in Denver that allowed her to start fresh in a market where her Portland reputation was irrelevant. My parents attended, though they spent most of the reception looking bewildered by the diverse, enthusiastic crowd that had gathered to celebrate our union. The Portland Youth Initiative had expanded to fund 12 different programs across the city, and I had been promoted to Director of Community Partnerships, a newly created position that allowed me to focus on developing innovative approaches to youth development. The foundation's work was being recognized nationally, and I had been invited to speak at conferences in cities across the country. But the moment that meant the most to me came during the wedding reception, when one of the teenagers from our after-school program stood up to make a spontaneous toast. "Miss Mia," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the crowded room, "you taught us that we don't have to wait for other people to believe in us before we start believing in ourselves. Thank you for showing us that building something real is better than pretending to be something you're not." As applause filled the community center, I realized that the best revenge against people who try to diminish you isn't anger or retaliation. It's simply living well, building something meaningful, and surrounding yourself with people who understand the difference between earning respect and demanding it. Victoria had spent our entire lives trying to prove she was better than me, but she had never bothered to become someone worth being. I had spent those same years focused on creating value for others, and in the end, that difference had made all the difference. The programs continued to grow and thrive, funded by people who believed in their mission rather than their networking potential. Victoria's career recovered, though she never again tried to involve herself in Portland philanthropy. And Alex and I built a partnership based on shared values and complete honesty, combining our resources and our commitment to create the kind of impact that neither of us could have achieved alone. Years later, when people asked me about the night that changed everything, I would tell them that it wasn't about defeating my sister or exposing her manipulation. It was about finally understanding that my worth had never been dependent on her approval, and my success had never been threatened by her interference. The only power Victoria had ever had over me was the power I had given her by caring about her opinion more than my own integrity. The kids we served didn't care about family dynamics or social positioning. They cared about having safe places to learn, caring adults to support them, and opportunities to discover their own potential. And in the end, that was the only validation that mattered, the only recognition that counted, and the only success that could never be stolen or diminished by someone else's insecurity. Victoria had tried to take my moment, but she had never understood that my moment wasn't about me at all. It was about the lives we were changing, the futures we were building, and the community we were serving. And that was something that belonged to all of us, something that could never be claimed by someone who had never done the work to earn it. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.